at Chatham House last week is worth reading on this if people haven't seen it, with an emphasis on democracy and free markets. And in that, the tilt to the Pacific, of which Pakistan, I think, should consider itself a part, is economically driven. By 2050, Deputy Ambassador, China will be 20% of the world's economy. India will be 15%, the US will be 12%. These are big, big shifts in global geoeconomics, and hard power tends to follow that economic power and indeed soft power. So I have absolutely no problem with Shah Mahmood's assertion at the outset and the policy set out by Imran Khan's government that geoeconomics should be a central part of the security conversations we have. What does that mean for Pakistan? Well, as I've already said, I think demographics are the key driver. The country is growing at about 2.4%. That's high. As I mentioned, 380 million odd people by the middle of the century, and just to keep pace with that population growth, the country needs to create about 1.5 million jobs a year. 1.5 million jobs a year just to stand still if those young people coming of age are to have a livelihood, to have security, be able to provide for their families. So it's no surprise, I think, in this town that the economy is the number one issue. And if you will allow me, an important part of that is gender equality. No country can achieve its potential without unleashing half of its population. I'm delighted to see many female members on the panel today. Too often, and in the room, too often I speak at events where it's a line of men in suits. So thank you to the organisers for bringing that voice to the stage and the conversation. I'd also commend the leadership of President Alvi, who has been a very, very powerful voice on family planning and the importance of having an honest and open conversation about family planning and population control given these matters. So in sum, I agree with many. I think it was discussed yesterday that Pakistan's population is an asset, but we have to work quite hard to make sure that that is not a demographic burden and becomes a demographic dividend. So Proposition 1, the economy, inclusive economic growth, driven by the demographic need, is absolutely rightly our focus. Proposition 2 is specifically related to Afghanistan, and that is that actually our collective interests on Afghanistan are aligned, and to that end, all partners have no alternative but to work with Pakistan. Our interests are aligned and we have to work with Pakistan. I don't think the macro picture that you're hearing from this panel is particularly changed by the withdrawal from Kabul in August. Certainly it's given us many, many deep challenges on which we have to work together, but I don't think the fundamentals actually strategically change. When I hear countries speak, if you look at, say, the Troika Plus statement that many of the governments represented here were involved in last month, we were all saying the same thing in Afghanistan. We want a safe passage for people, we want to avoid a humanitarian crisis, we want to counter terrorism and not allow Afghanistan to become again a geography where threat can be projected to Pakistan or anywhere else. We want the rights of minorities to be protected, yes, and yes, we think that teenage girls should be able to go to school. On all of these issues, a stable, inclusive Afghanistan is our shared goal. I want to emphasize the UK is taking a pragmatic approach. We are talking to the Taliban. The Prime Minister's envoy, Sir Simon Gass, an old colleague and friend of mine, was one of the first Western envoys to visit Kabul in that guise. And as well as engaging, we are very focused on the humanitarian crisis. I think it is a crisis. Total UK aid to Afghanistan this year is nearly £250 million, with £50 million for life-saving humanitarian support to over 2.5 million vulnerable Afghans. And a lot of our focus, including at the OIC conference, which I commend Pakistan for hosting this coming weekend, is on discussing the fix, the very complex fix, for the liquidity problem that Afghanistan faces. How do we get cash back into that system? I hope people have noticed the US Treasury has taken a decision to allow personal and non-personal remittances to be made, and the World Bank has just announced the release of nearly $300 million of assets from the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. So these are very important issues we're working on. Pakistan as a key partner and a player, and itself, as Shah Mahmood Qureshi has the most to lose if we cannot find a way through these issues. So my second proposition is really collaboration on Afghanistan. Third and finally is about regional connectivity. And I do agree that in line with these comments on geoeconomics, we must do more to build regional connectivity in South Asia. As a statistic I'm very fond of, that ASEAN as a formal trading bloc in Southeast Asia, its collective GDP comes from about 20% of intra-regional trade. Here in South Asia, obviously not a formal bloc, it's about 2%. Bluntly, those jobs will not be created for those kids if we don't redress that and boost more trade in this region. Therefore, I think flowing from that is that some way to de-escalation with India, between India and Pakistan, is absolutely essential. Confrontation is in neither side's interest. You all know well the long-standing position of the UK that it's for both countries to find a lasting resolution to the situation in Kashmir, taking into account the wishes of the Kashmiri people, and it's not for the UK to prescribe a solution or to act as a mediator. And I do think, if I can emphasize Ambassador Ganesh's comments, the risk of an unwanted escalation is the thing that we should guard against, whilst encouraging dialogue and trying to find lasting diplomatic solutions. On my economic theme, the World Bank estimates that if the border between India and Pakistan was opened, it would lead to a 30% rise over some years in Pakistan's GDP, a 30% rise. I also think for regional connectivity, it means that there is not a sort of zero-sum choice with China, and I think Foreign Minister Qureshi has set this out very well. If you like, the shorthand for the message is avoid campism. The CPEC infrastructure and the investment of CPEC, I think, is good for Pakistan if it is done in the right way, if those initiatives increase regional connectivity, if it's transparent, doesn't have a large debt burden, transfers skills and meet international standards on debt sustainability, environmental impacts, climate change, social impact, and as I say, transparency. So I don't think that needs to be a threat to UK interests and allows us to partner and build growth. So in conclusion, Ambassador, I think these are very serious challenges. And I should say for the UK, most of you see me say publicly and on my digital diplomacy, which I'm trying to champion on behalf of Shah Mahmood, the UK relationship with Pakistan is non-discretionary. It's built on our deep diaspora links, our very close population ties, 1.6 million British Pakistanis, 400,000 visitors a day. We've seen the return of airlines. We've seen the talk of that huge economic potential, which I'd like to build on, and a development relationship that invests heavily in education, in health, in human capital, as I mentioned. And I've got this far, I haven't even talked about cricket, so I'm very pleased to avoid that. My final two comments with that is to say that I do think, as several speakers have referred to, that Pakistan has a challenge with its perceptions. And I like the quip that we shouldn't leave diplomacy to the diplomats. But there is a collective job to ensure that modern-day perceptions of Pakistan that I see and understand from living and working in this wonderful country are matched by what people outside see. I think, therefore, conferences like this should be absolutely commended. It's not my job as an ambassador to be a cheerleader for Pakistan. It's my job to advance British interests. But where we do see those perceptions as out of place, I think we should call them out. And if anyone has been to the Pakistan Expo pavilion in Dubai and wonders how to do a fantastic job of promoting Pakistan, go and see it. The most extraordinary pavilion, absolutely brilliantly done. And finally, and I think this echoes what Ambassador Munter was saying, in all of these conversations, this goes back, I think, to my comment on looking beyond traditional categories as we face these trends. I am very convinced in everything I have said in the last 10 minutes and everything we are discussing as a panel, the solutions will be found within Pakistan. And I think it is quite easy for us in a traditional diplomat's paradigm to really focus about the Pakistan relationship with the US, what's happening in the Beltway, what's happening with the Biden administration, what's happening in London, what does this mean for Pakistan's relationship with Europe, the tilt to China and the Indo-Pacific. Actually, the solutions will be Pakistani solutions, and they will be found within Pakistan. Thank you very much. Bahut shukriya.
That was very proactive and constructive, High Commissioner. Especially the three trends that you pointed out for the future are thought-provoking, because we focus so much on geopolitics, but you mentioned demography, environment, and pandemics as continuing challenges and perhaps will grow in time. And thank you also for three prepositions. Continued focus on geoeconomics, I think, but there's a lot that goes into it. And on Afghanistan, I agree with you that it is a collective responsibility. The stability in Afghanistan is now, we all have stakes in that. And third, on regional connectivity within South Asia, how it can spur economic growth in Pakistan. The final speaker we have is Ambassador Raffel, and she, as you are aware, was the former Assistant Secretary of State, and also she's currently Senior Associate Center for Strategic and Studies. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chowdhury. It really is a pleasure to be back in Pakistan after a COVID break, and I want to thank the Pakistani organizers for including me in this Margala dialogue. In my remarks, I'm going to move from the specific to the general. And while much has been said already about Afghanistan, I still find a lot of people asking me and asking everyone what happened and why. So here's the short version. After 9/11, the US came in anger to Afghanistan, seeking revenge in a country whose history and culture it did not understand that well. It then fell victim to mission creep, trying to create a Western model democracy on an accelerated timetable at the point of a gun. This resulted in massive corruption,